This is the Jan Commander review. Jan is the newest commander, of course he's been out for a little bit now, in the Garrison family. And I really like using him. And whether that is with Jadwiga, who's I'm assuming to be the natural pairing for him considering their kits line up, or it's with YSS and a mixed Garrison, he always finds a way to just really be a nightmare, even for infantry commanders. So in this video, we're going to go over his skills, some of his talents that you can use, where you pair them, and really how he stacks up. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's tackle some of his skills. His first skill, of course, is just a actual direct damage factor, pre-expertise, and it's pretty solid. I like it a lot, but really it becomes much better with the expertise, which we'll tackle in a little bit. Second, he gives 15% attack, and then 15% defense and 10% skill damage. This feeds well into Jadwiga's whole skill damage kit, and feeds well into Nevsky's whole skill damage kit, which we will tackle the pairings in a little bit, but it really synchronizes well with what most of the Cav garrisons want to do, and that's deal a lot of damage and make it really painful to try to hit. Of course, this is also great when you consider the skill damage on an AoE, which is great against Swarm. Third, he takes 10% less normal attack damage, which makes him a lot better against Swarm. And when they take skill damage, they have a 15% chance to remove all normal buffs from the attacker, which again is really good against Swarm. The only downside to this is it only triggers once every 8 seconds, so large swarms aren't going to do a lot against. They're not going to do. It's not going to trigger on everybody, which is a little bit frustrating. But overall, it's still the 10% flat and less normal attack damage. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've got 10 different marches trying to swarm your building, it really does stack up pretty quick. His fourth skill is 20% more health, which anybody who's been on my channel for more than a couple of videos knows that I am a big proponent of more health for troops. And then normal attacks have a 10% chance to get a buff that increases their normal attack damage dealt, which then includes counterattacks and normal basic attacks. So this will actually make counterattack stronger, which then makes him even stronger against Swarm. And of course, his expertise then becomes a slightly higher damage, and then instead of dealing extra damage to one troop, it does it in 3 surrounding troops. I am not a huge fan of the small damage factor of this. I would love to have seen it at like 500 or 600, but part of the reason why that's not that way is because there's a lot of other Cav commanders that increase skill damage. So even though that damage factor is only 300, it's going to be higher due to the increased skill damage on this skill. It's going to be higher using the skill tree or somebody else's skill tree. It's going to be higher, and that's part of why it's as low as it is. Okay, now that we've tackled the actual skills, let's talk about some of the talents. One of the most counterintuitive things I see with people, that even with high damage garrisons, is avoiding skill damage reduction and damage taken reduction. Honestly, that is the best investment you can make as a garrison, because the less damage you take, the less deads you take. The less damage you take, the more troops you have to counterattack with, the more troops you have to hit with the skill damage. So I always go for impregnable, and I always go for impenetrable fortifications, pretty much with every garrison. I like Emblazoned Shield. You'll find that this is somewhat similar to Jadwiga's, but without this extra path here. Because then, instead, we can work on 60 rage whenever a skill is used. Skill damage after an active skill when he's primary. And just basically increasing skill damage and rage gain with the skill tree, which then gives you more skills. Whereas this extra little bit of defense, attack, and health is just, it's not that useful. Rage gain here. But the biggest priorities you want with your talents with Jan is damage reduction, rage increase, and wherever you can pick up skill damage increase. Because not only is his skill going to hit, but that secondary commander, hopefully if you have a bunch of troops that are still alive, is going to hit just as hard. So who do you pair with Jan? Well, it really depends on who you have. For people who are just picking up garrisons and are considering building Jan, if you have Nevsky, they're really good together, especially with Jan primary. Especially considering Nevsky's expertise does increase health by 10% and does 5% normal attack damage, which helps with the anti-swarm. Skill damage is increased by up to 35%, which makes Jan's primary skill hit that much harder, which again is why they kept the damage factor on the anti-swarm so low. If you have Jadwiga, because you already have her built, she is also excellent. I do recommend, if you have the two, to probably put Jadwiga first, because her first skill will increase damage by 20%, which isn't as good as Nevsky's skill damage increase, but it's guaranteed versus a percent chance. In addition, that increase will then work with Jan's increase and pretty much build up this anti-swarm to hit relatively hard, especially considering that Jan's skill does not reduce for each additional opponent hit. So the higher you can get that damage factor, it's going to hit everybody for that damage factor, all three of them. Whereas somebody like Theodora actually does reduce damage for each additional target hit. So that's definitely something that's worthwhile to think about. YSS also works with Jan in a mixed garrison, with Jan as the primary. Just remember that for the Broken Moon skill, you need to have 2 or more troop types. So you need to have a little bit of infantry or a little bit of archers or a little bit of siege with your cavalry. I recommend about 10% of each. So then I do 80, 10, 10. So 80% cavalry, 10% infantry, 10% archers, which would mean it'd be like 160k cavalry, 20k infantry, and 20k archers in a 200k march. So now that we've actually covered the pairings, here's how they actually perform. Looking at this report, you can see that this is a Jadwiga Jan, and this was actually Shadow in our home kingdom of 2057, defending a GW flag. When you look at this report, they had about 8 million invested when you add it all up, versus our 7 point something million. So we overall had fewer troops invested, and they took a losing trade on this. And not only did they take a losing trade there, all the swarmers took insanely bad trades trying to swarm it. So even though this flag did go down, the sheer cost for them to take the flag out was absolutely insane. And this is really a testament to how great Jan is at stabilizing Jadwiga and making him even better when you pair them together, because extra damage is doing that much more to enemies. And now that we've covered Jadwiga Jan, we'll talk about the other major pairing, which is Jan YSS for each major troop type. This was actually done during a big fort rally, and what you'll find is this is very similar to how the YSS works. In mixed garrisons, a lot of mixed garrisons operate off this principle of the main trade is not great. When you take apart the 300k severely wounded that could be healed, really deads versus deads, it's not terribly uneven. But the losing trade on the actual fight part isn't what we're looking at here. What we're going to look at is the sheer number of people who are taking just large amounts of deads from being nearby or trying to swarm. And it is really, really frequent that you see this between Jan's AoE skill and YSS's AoE skill. It just hits over and over and over again. And it will pick up, like this one, for example, a lot of enemy deads. And anybody who's unfortunate enough to try to swarm is going to be extremely hurt, especially with this pairing, because you have anti-swarm with Jan and you have anti-swarm with YSS. So the two of them pair together very well. It's just that you trade off some of the initial rally versus garrison trade to have a little bit better against swarm. And on the off, even if there's only a couple swarmers, it's very much like Pakal Herald. A couple swarmers turns the rally from a slight loss to a really, really crazy win. And considering the fort didn't even fall while defending this, I think it's a trade that I think most people would take over and over again if you're on the defending side. So, really overall, this pairing works very well as well. But with that, we'll conclude our discussion on Jan. I think he's a great commander that is worth the investment, especially if you are just getting into garrisons. He's a new commander who should be around for a while. He pairs well with the field commander in Nevsky, and that trade that can keep you afloat long enough for you to get your second commander, and really just build up a defense that's accessible for everyone. But let me know what you think. Are you considering building him? Do you think he's worth the investment? Let me know in the comments. But as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.